Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, I want to go over this church news article called Current First Presidency, Quorum of 12 Apostles are the sixth longest tenured in church history. That caught my attention. This was sent to me by Anonymous, and it caught my attention because, lately we've been talking a lot about age, specifically President Nelson's age. In the last video, which I would encourage you to watch if you haven't, we talked about these two stories where D. Todd Christopherson, as there was a new BYU Idaho president that was, taking over. Yeah, he told this story about, or he basically brought up Elijah and how he was translated, and then things passed on to Elisha, and then joked, about who knows if President Henry B. Eyring is translated yet or not. And then more recently, and the purpose for my last video was uh, Michael, a member of the Tabernacle Choir. He was at BYU Provo, and it was Elder Holland, and he said the same thing as BYU Provo was getting a new university president. So, uh, it, what? Like, have they been talking about this in the background, or is it starting to happen? We don't have a whole lot of details about how the translation process is going to roll out. Some ways that you read the scriptures, it sounds like it could just be like an instant thing, like church wide. I'm not so sure that we can like count on that. There hasn't been any explicit statements or anyone that's expounded upon that, and so I'm just waiting to see how things go. I wouldn't be surprised though if there's like an initial group that starts getting translated, and maybe that plays into this whole thing of longest tenured in church history. And I'm going to show you some other interesting things. And also, I'm going to talk about the first temple uh, that was dedicated once President Nelson became president of the church. And he was the one that dedicated it. And I never had thought about this, but the name of the temple, I feel like it goes along with the symbolism of President Nelson being a heart surgeon. And so we're going to get into that too. Before we do, here's the update on the Book of Mormon sharing challenge. 5,916 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been shared. Um, and then 50 reports of missionaries meeting with these people, and 17 baptisms, which is amazing. We're pushing forward, trying to get to 6,000, so just everyone keep it up, and good job. Okay, let me start reading this. In the 5+ years President Russell M. Nelson has led the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the presiding council, the Council of the First Presidency, and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, has been one of familiarity and consistency. This is key. I think this is key. I'm going to show you why. But continuing, in fact, the 15 apostles who comprise that council have combined for one of its longest serving in nearly 200 years of church history. A number of previous first presidencies, so now we're just talking about the first presidency. A number of previous first presidencies have served for longer periods than the 10 years so far of President Nelson and his counselors, President Dallin H. Oaks and President Henry B. Eyring. Those include presidencies of President Nelson's predecessors, President Thomas S. Monson and President Gordon B. Hinckley. And then the difference now is the longevity of service of the currently constituted Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Okay, so let's zero in on the first presidency. I came across this. I think I've referenced this before in previous videos. It's a Wikipedia article, has a really helpful table of like the first presidency and how it's changed over time, and key events and members of the first presidency, including assistants and other things. So I copied all this, I put it on Google Sheets because I wanted to do some specific things that weren't already there. I wanted to know exactly how many days, months, and years each first presidency lasted for. So going through a pretty monotonous process, I was able to do that and find the formulas and all that stuff. And so this is what I have. Okay. So right now, the first presidency that we have right now, the way that it's constituted right now, with President Russell M. Nelson as president, or president of the church, Dallin H. Oaks as first counselor, Henry B. Eyring as second counselor. Uh, it's been in this configuration for 5 years, 4 months, and 21 days, a total of 1,968 days. And that puts them in the number 15 spot compared to other first presidencies in the past. You can see here Thomas S. Monson, Henry B. Eyring as first counselor, Dieter F. Uchtdorf as second counselor. They were together for 9 years, 10 months, and 30 days. So almost 10 years, just a little bit shy of 10 years. A long time. And that's the number 3 spot. Okay. Let's go up. The number 1 spot is Gordon B. Hinckley, Thomas S. Monson as first counselor, James E. Faust as second counselor, and they went 12 years and 5 months exactly, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so the number 1 spot, number 2 spot, or number 1 spot, number 3 spot. Who was the number 2 spot? The number 2 spot, you have to go back to the 30s and the 40s to Heber J. Grant as president of the church, first counselor J. Reuben Clark, second counselor David O. McKay. Now, it dawned on me, looking at these dates. I mean, 1934 to 1945, though, hopefully you're familiar enough with world history to know what was going on during that time. Those are the years of World War II. And instantly, as I realized that, and I never realized this before, because I've never done this kind of study before of the first presidency. But that's really interesting because essentially what the Lord did is he chose them to be born when they were and then live as long as they did, and for them to be able to be together as a first presidency for this entire traumatic time in human history, the bloodiest war in world history, World War II. It makes sense that the Lord would provide the church with stability during that time of tribulation. A lot of times we think about the tribulations as a future event, which I would argue it's not, based on everything that we've read so far. Especially there's this idea of the 7-year tribulation period. That's an idea imported by outside the church, and unfortunately is starting to take hold among members of the church. But I have a playlist about that. Just go check it out. But we are already in tribulations. And this was one of the biggest ones. So the Lord provided a first presidency that was stable. There was no changes during those years. So with that in mind, let's go back. Okay, the current first presidency, they're in the number 15th place. A lot of us feel like the second coming is soon. I wouldn't be surprised, they probably aren't going to beat that record because, 5 years right now and then 12 years. So, unless President Nelson lives that long, I don't think that they're gonna beat that record. But they have been together for a while. Looking at the number 1 spot, the years for that during President Hinckley's time was 1995 to 2007. Now, we didn't see anything like World War II during those years, but there was a lot of things going on. President Hinckley's time was a time of lots of temples being built. Also, it was the turn of the millennium. Also, the internet was starting to become a common thing and entering, just your typical household across the world. So it was an important time, and there were a lot of changes going on. This is the time of the family proclamation, right? Now, looking at President Monson's time from 2008 to 2018, also a turbulent time in society with declining values and stuff like that, and also, just like crazy things going on in the world. So I think that during these key times, the Lord has provided stability within the first presidency. Um, I think it's easier for us as a church when there's stability. We as human beings, we like stability. So anyway, that's just something to think about, and we'll just have to see what actually takes place. How long President Nelson is going to live. This September, it's going to be his 99th birthday. And then next year will be his 100th birthday, uh, September of 2024. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, it says, in addition to their assignments in church and area oversight and participation in conferences, devotionals, and instruction worldwide, the members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles have been increasingly involved by President Nelson in joining him on ministries across the globe and presiding at most temple dedications and rededications. Now, we've talked about that before because I did this video here, 55 temple dedications a year, every year. That was something that was said by Elder David A. Bednar. And it makes sense because President Nelson, he holds the record for the most number of temples announced. Before him, it was President Hinckley, but he broke that record in April of 2022. So it would make sense, right? Because now, but the thing about it though, look at this. When we go to this Wikipedia article, it has a history of all the temples and who dedicated them and when and stuff like that. So here's President Nelson right here. His first dedication after becoming president of the church was the Concepción, Chile temple, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But you'll notice that before that, if you were to go all the way up, the only names that you're going to see are members of the First Presidency, and then just like one or two times the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. So all senior apostles, and rarely including the president of the Quorum of the 12. But then things change, and I think this is just a hastening of the work. Things change with David A. Bednar. I think he was the first. I think he was the first apostle from the Quorum of the 12 to dedicate a temple, except for maybe at the very, very beginning. I don't know who Daniel H. Wells is. He dedicated the St. George, Utah temple. Let's just take a quick look. What was he? Counselor to the Quorum. Okay, second counselor in the First Presidency. Let's see, 1857. And okay, no, so he was in the First Presidency. So as far as I know, I'm not going to go through all of these, but as far as I know, David A. Bednar was the first member of the Quorum of the 12, not being the president of the Quorum of the 12 that dedicated a temple. And in this case, it was October 2016, the Star Valley, Wyoming temple. Okay, and then you see President Nelson right here. He becomes president of the church right here. And then afterwards, you see all these highlights that I did. You have Elder Renlund, Suarez, Bednar again, Anderson, Suarez, Rasband, Gong, Stevenson, all of them. They're all getting to dedicate temples. And for the temples that have, now these temples right here, they're not yet dedicated. They're scheduled to be dedicated. The trend continues, right? So things have changed in a really big way. And it has to do with just all these temples that are coming online. Okay, now the last thing I want to talk about, President Nelson. He became president of the church, and he dedicated the first temple during his time as president, and it was the Concepción, or in Spanish, Concepción temple, Chile temple. And I looked at that word and I was like, conception. It's the same thing as what it is in English. These are cognates. These are words from different languages that sound the same, basically, because they're related. Conception. That's when a life starts, right? That's when a pregnancy starts. And we know that one of the main symbols used for the second coming is a pregnancy. It's a pregnancy of a woman. And once she gives birth, that's when, the kingdom comes. That's when Christ comes. And just like a birth, you can't tell exactly when it's going to happen. well, unless it's a C-section, which thankfully that's what we had. Not that we chose it, but that's one of the benefits is knowing exactly when it's going to happen because you schedule it. But with a normal birth, um, you don't know when it's going to happen, but you definitely know it's happening soon because contractions and stuff like that. So at the very beginning of his presidency, already thinking about the fact that he was a heart surgeon, and he's coming at a time when society is very divided, and unfortunately, the church, especially with like social issues, is divided. And symbolically, it's perfect that he's a heart surgeon because he's trying to create Zion, the Zion to greet the Lord when he comes. And Zion is one in heart and one in mind. And it's also the pure in heart. So we have a heart surgeon. And then next on deck, if things go this way, the next one is a judge. Down H. Oaks, he was literally a judge. He was a Utah Supreme Court justice. So at the very beginning of his presidency, October 2018, he dedicates a temple called Conception. Symbolically, if the Lord is just kind of giving a sign for those that have eyes to see, ears to hear, has the second coming reached a stage? The process of the second coming, the process of the last days. Did it start with President Nelson at that time? I looked at the history of Conception. It says Conception was founded by Don Pedro de Valdivia in 1550 north of the Biobío River at the site which is today known as Penco. At that time, it was given the name Concepción de María Purísima del Nuevo Extremo, or Mary Immaculate Conception of the New End, which that caught my eye, the new end. I looked at extremo to see if it had any additional meaning in Spanish. I just pulled this up, and it's the same thing as in English. And extreme, far, ultimate, outermost, outer, outside, desperate, furthest, critical, superlative, all that stuff. So the new end. It goes on to talk about how this was on La Frontera, or the border, right? So it probably had reference to that. But again, as we approach the second coming, a lot of us feel that we are at the border. We're that close to the second coming. And of course, the story of Mary is a story of a birth. When we think of Mary, we typically think of her in the nativity setting. There's more of her in the New Testament, but that's like kind of like the big thing when it comes to Mary is that she was the mother of Christ and gave birth to him. And so that's like a big thing in the Catholic Church, the conception of Mary, the Immaculate Conception, you hear it all the time. So it's just an interesting thing. That's all. It's just interesting. It's something to consider. And I had missed that. It didn't dawn on me until I did this video. So I'm going to end it here. I was going to read a little bit more, but you can check this out. It has some more dates and stuff to think about. But I would propose that aside from just going with Occam's razor, taking the secular point of view, I would tend to think that the Lord is introducing stability as the world becomes less stable and as big changes are happening in the church and in the world. So, and as far as translation goes, who knows? But it seems like there's been some hints given. All we can do is wait and see. All right, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.